Hi, good evening. I'd like to welcome you to Poem Praise 2. I do thank you for tuning in, and I certainly hope that peace and blessings have been, will be, and is upon you and your family this evening. Now, we are going to get right back into For Women Only. We are now in take number 2 of, which chapter we on? We on chapter number 6, right? Keeper of the Visual Rolodex. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into take number 2. And it goes like this. The Tom Cruise conversation. One day during the time I was trying to come to terms with these findings, Jeff and I were riding in the car discussing what I was discovering. Jeff confessed that he didn't understand why I was so surprised. Here's how our conversation went from there. Jeff: but you knew men are visual, right? Me: well, yes, of course, but since most women aren't, I just didn't get it. I just don't experience things the same way you do. Jeff: see, I'm not sure I really believe that. Me: well, it's true. Jeff: maybe we just use different language to describe it. For example, think of a movie star that you find physically attractive. Tom Cruise, say. After we've seen one of his movies, how many times will that attractive image rise up in your mind the next day? Me: never. Jeff: I must not be explaining myself correctly. I mean, how many times will a thought of what he looked like with his shirt off just sort of pop up in your head? Me: never. Never? As in never? Me: 0 times. It just doesn't happen. Jeff, after a long pause: wow. That was the end of that conversation, but it wasn't the end of the issue. When my husband recently told this story to our home group, he confessed that at first he thought I was embarrassed to admit that I really might have pictures of Tom Cruise in my head. It wasn't until he watched me tell the story to a group of women and watched most of the women say never right along with me that the lightning bolt hit. After we've seen one of his movies, how many times will that attractive image rise up in your mind the next day? Our little exchange did more to teach Jeff and me how each of us is wired and not wired than almost anything else. And I hope my new understanding is helping me be more supportive and protective of my husband in today's culture. It's a minefield out there. For those of us who aren't visual, it's hard to imagine that a man could have no control over something popping up in his head. We also may not recognize that in our sex-saturated culture, the very act of living in a minefield of unwanted possible triggers and potential images that could be recalled days or years later. To use a common example, primetime television commercials often flash sensual 2-second images, say, of a woman undressing, that are up on the screen and gone before the man can look away. Nothing he can do. Boom. It's added to the mental Rolodex. Just like that. Oh no, that's not in the book. I added that. Whether he wants it or not. Mental Rolodex on speed dial. When I ask men how often a central thought of image bars into their consciousness, many of them said something like, all the time. Of course, I wanted to know what all the time meant. If you're talking about a teenage boy, all the time means all the time. One 40-year-old man explained it would be fairly unusual for a teenage guy to go a couple of hours without an involuntary image. And then when he does, he could spend half an hour straight on the subject. A 20-something man also has a pretty difficult time. Once you reach your 30s and 40s, you're a little more settled and those thoughts are more often triggered by something. And once those thoughts are triggered, he and others clarified, the man has to make a great effort to tear them down. They also said that if the man is highly visual oriented, and if that temptation is entertained at all, it is even more difficult to get rid of. This is normal. Okay, let's take a deep breath for a second. For some of us, this is a lot to take in. For others, it's no big deal. Also, if you are visual, you may more readily understand your husband's struggle. And don't worry, you're normal. But it's important for the rest of us to realize that our men are normal too. As a national survey showed, this temptation is common to every man. And as my interviewers emphasize, it has no bearing on their devotion to their wives. Before we go any further, we should make a critical distinction. Temptations are not sins. The Bible states that Jesus was tempted in every way and yet without sin. What do we do with those temptations is the issue. And well, get to that in a moment. For now, let's sort out the progression of male responses to see what are involuntary and which most definitely are not. Temptations are not sins. What we do with those temptations is the issue. Step number 1. For every man, sensual images and thoughts arrive involuntarily. Daniel Weiss, the media and sexuality analyst at Focus on the Family, told me, I would emphasize to women that yes, men do have these thoughts whether they want them or not. In addition, the man's internal temptation is often not only unintentional but automatic. If the stimulus is there, a great figure in a tight outfit, so is the response. As one man put it, it doesn't even register that I thought a great body until 2 seconds later. A man cannot prevent those initial thoughts or images from intruding. Don't believe me. Let me illustrate. Don't read this. No, really don't read it. Just look at the letters Impossible, isn't it? Well, I'm reading a book, so I'm going to continue. There is no way to just notice the letters without reading the word. That's what it's like for a guy. His brain reads good body without his even realizing it. One man provided this analogy. If you are nearsighted, everything is fuzzy without glasses. With your glasses, everything is a sharp focus. If a babe walks into Starbucks, other women sort of see fuzzy. All they see is that a woman is there. But all the men in the room suddenly have their glasses on. That woman is in a sharp focus. And it's really hard not to stare at her. This distinction actually debunks the assumption that all the trouble starts because men have roving eyes. A better understanding is that they are roving, underdressed women. And men can't not notice their existence. Pooh, she's gone. She's not there. No, I just added that because of the words. You just can't notice that there's not no existence. Like, they're just not there. Sometimes individuals have a lot of attraction that will attract your attention just so that you know they're there, regardless of the clothes that they may be wearing. Maybe it's the colors. I don't know. Just saying. Back to the book, though. We on step number 2. Every man's involuntary physical impulse is to enjoy the feeling associated with these thoughts and images. Because men are hardwired to be, let me try that sentence again, y'all. Goes like this. Because men are hardwired to be sexual hunters, every thought and image related to that pursuit comes associated with powerful feelings. When a sensual image enters a man's mind or a great body enters his line of sight, it brings a rush of sexual pleasure. A short-term pleasure that hopefully the man denies himself in order to honor God, his wife, or his mental purity, and thus establish deeper pleasure down the road. Hopefully, the man denies himself the short-term pleasure in order to honor his wife. One married man told me it is pleasurable in a small way, in the same way the sex is pleasurable. And focusing myself to remove that thought from my mind is sometimes as difficult as it would be to stop in the middle of sex. Another wrote, when an image plays on a man's brain or he gazes at an attractive woman, it's not just pure lust. There's a thrill there, and a man can go back to that adrenaline rush by entertaining those images. In my clinical research for the Lights of 10th Street, I heard over and over again how much men gravitate towards something that gives them an inner excitement and illicit thrill, which helps us then understand why some men can get trapped by pornography. And that does complete take number 2. So stay tuned to take number 3 of chapter 6. We're going to be on step number 3, which is, but every man can make a choice to dwell on the images and thoughts or to dismay them. So stay tuned. And until I talk with you again, I want you and your family to be blessed and have a wonderful rest of the evening. Later, y'all. Till next time. Later, y'all.